Today we're going to check out how Pulumi can work with GitHub Actions to do continuous deployment to your cloud of choice, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or even Kubernetes in any of the above clouds or on premises. And we're going to use a GitOps workflow to use branches to push to staging and promote that to production. This application is actually a Ruby on Rails app. So if we go in the app directory here, we're going to see standard scaffolded Ruby on Rails application. We've added a little to-do list manager in here that we're going to be editing as part of this demo. The only difference you'll see here is notice there's a Docker file here. So the application is fully Dockerized, and we'll leverage that in just a moment as part of doing the deployment. If we go back into the root of the repo, the infra directory actually contains the Pulumi specification for the infrastructure required to run our application. And this is not your average Rails app. It turns out this Pulumi program actually creates a GKE cluster that we're going to deploy into. So this is fully self-contained environment. We can stand up any number of parallel versions of this. You'll see here we actually have a development instance, a prod instance, and a stage instance. And those typically map to branches, which we'll see is how the deployments work. We also provision a managed Postgres database. That's a Google Cloud SQL Postgres database. So we don't have to worry about managing backups and persistence if we were to spin up our own, say, database service. But if we go look in the main file for this application, we'll actually see that we're building a Docker image in code. So all this is in TypeScript. We're building a Docker image, and it's going to be published to the Docker Hub as part of doing a deployment. And then we'll see we're doing a Kubernetes deployment and a Kubernetes service. And so this is typical Kubernetes stuff that we're doing here that's going to be part of the deployment. So basically, we're spinning up a GKE cluster, we're building a Docker image, standing up a Cloud SQL database, publishing the image to Docker Hub, pulling it into the Kubernetes cluster, and deploying Kubernetes updates, all in a single unified workflow. So a few other minor points before seeing it in action. We've got this .github folder. This contains the workflow file. And the workflow file is the new GitHub Actions capability for doing actions triggered by pushes and pull requests. And so we're just using that very simply here. What we're saying is on push, we're actually going to deploy to the current stack. The stack is basically Pulumi's version of a branch, if you will. It's an independent environment you can deploy into. And then we'll see pull requests. We're actually previewing what would happen before we merge the pull request. This is actually a useful feature. We'll see Pulumi has a GitHub app that's integrated into PR workflow so that you can actually review changes before they're made and deployed to your environments. The last piece that we'll see is this .pulumi folder. And this simply maps branches, master, and staging to stack names, PCS prod, PCS stage. If we actually look at the Pulumi Cloud Console, we'll see that there are actually pages for these stacks here already, and we can go drill into them. And this keeps track of all the deployment history. And we'll see here, we've got a URL that points us to the Rails application that's already been deployed. And then we can go look at to-do lists here, and we can add to-do lists and so on. Just to save time later, I'm actually going to pop up the production instance as well, and just open up that web application here, and we'll position on it. We're going to change the to-do list application, and so we'll want to see that in action here. So the to-do list is empty here. So now let's go back, and we're just going to make a simple edit to the application. We're going to make our update in the staging branch so we can see what the workflow looks like there. We're currently even with master. If we just go into the app logic here, in app, we're going to change one of the views. We'll find the to-do list view, and then we'll go here, and we're going to use our to-do list as fancy Kanban board. So change to-do app list to Kanban board. And then we're actually just going to commit these changes directly from the UI. So this already has kicked off a workflow in the background, and we can see that in action if we go back here. So we're one commit ahead. Let's create a pull request and create the pull request. And we'll see that we're already have kicked off two steps here. And if we look, we'll see that it's actually deploying the testing instance. And then after it's done that, it's actually going to preview what would happen if we were to merge this change into production. And that will just take a few moments. It's actually in the background, so it's building the Docker container, and it's publishing it, and it's going to rev the Kubernetes deployment. Okay, great. All the updates have occurred. If we look at the details here, we're going to see actually Pulumi added information to the pull request, the bot, so that we know what's going to happen. So here we see the preview of the production stack. It's telling us, hey, there's one resource that would be updated if we deployed this. If there was any downtime, we'd see that here. In this case, it's a rolling update in Kubernetes, so there isn't. And it says the staging branch was also updated successfully. If we want, we can hop on over to the Cloud Console and see details about this update. So the Pulumi console keeps track of the resources that were updated. It links back actually to GitHub, so we can see the commit that was deployed. We can look at the full Docker build log. We can see what Kubernetes resources were updated. And in fact, we can go look at a full history, which often corresponds to the Git commit history. But since we just deployed this into staging, let's go ahead and take a look at the app and refresh. And sure enough, it's turned into a fancy Kanban board. So we can go and modify, and remember all this is getting stored in that Postgres database, and so you saw even though it did a rolling deployment, our old entry was still there, and so that's because the Postgres database was persistent the entire time. Now let's say production, if we reload production is still the same old boring to-do app, so let's go ahead and actually merge this. Now this is a GitOps workflow, so normally what would happen here is people would be looking at these changes, they would be debating, is this the right change to make? They'd look at the impact, and maybe if there's downtime, that would be surprising. And our team's product, the SaaS product, actually integrates with this to allow approval workflows. So if you want your DevOps master to approve of all changes to infrastructure, you can do that. But here, we're just going to go ahead and create a merge commit. And remember from that workflow, the merge commit is going to be very similar in its impact. But if we go here and we're on the master branch, we can see that, hey, this has been committed. And we'll see that it's actually now deploying to production. And so this is the GitHub action that now is taking those changes that were verified in staging. Now it's applying them to master. And as soon as that's done, we should be able to go back to the app, check it out, and we'll have our new Kanban board. All right, and you see now finally it's finished deploying the production update, and we can see the full update of all the Docker image builds and all that good stuff. But the more important part is we can now go back to the application, refresh, and now we've got a Kanban board. And there we go. That's Pulumi and GitHub Actions together. I think it's really exciting that this enables sort of a more GitOps style workflow, which a lot of teams are moving towards. And I should have mentioned earlier, but we could have been updating things like the Kubernetes cluster size. We could have been changing the database, the backup schedule, all of the infrastructure, all of the application. We can update in exactly the same way. So I think this is super cool, and I can't wait for customers to get their hands on it.